Okay, I want you to picture the worst day in this animal's entire life. It's an Allosaurus, apex predator, the scariest thing in its whole world, the kind of animal every other creature around it is basically built to avoid. And right now, it's dying. Slowly. There's a hole punched clean through the bottom of its hips, right up through the groin. And here's the part that matters. It did not get that wound from another predator. It got it from its food. We'll come back to how that happened, I promise, because it's one of the best stories in this whole video. But I lead with it for a reason. We've all kind of agreed on this idea that the predator is the one you're scared of, right? The hunter's the villain, the plant eater's the snack. And most of the time, sure, that holds up. But not always. Because every so often, prehistory cooked up a herbivore so ridiculous, so overarmed, that the actual apex predators of the day looked at it and quietly decided, yeah, I'm gonna go find something easier. So today we're doing the plant eaters that flipped the script. The ones that were, genuinely, scarier than the things trying to eat them. Let me set the table first, real quick, because you need to understand why this even happened. When most people picture the deadliest prehistoric animals, they picture predators. Makes sense. Raptors, tyrannosaurs, the big carcharodontosaurs, spinosaurs, the whole murder lineup. And there's a logic to it. A predator that can't kill doesn't eat. A predator that can't defend its turf loses its turf. So evolution keeps sharpening them, generation after generation, because the ones that aren't deadly enough just stop existing. But here's the thing everybody forgets. That pressure, it cuts both ways. Because who, honestly, wants to just get eaten? Nobody. No animal is out here volunteering. So while the predators were busy getting nastier, the plant eaters were getting nastier right back, in their own weird directions. And that tug of war, that arms race, ran for well over 100 million years. That's what gave us horns, spiked tails, body armor, sheer stupid size. The herbivores were in the fight the whole time. Now, most of the time, the predators kept pace. They usually could still bring down even the scary herbivores, right up until the very end. But once in a blue moon, evolution would spit out a plant eater that just broke the rules. Something so heavily built, it stopped being prey in any real sense and started being the thing you don't poke. Let's meet a few of them. First one, and I love this one, because it's a sauropod, and sauropods are already cheating. Think about it. The longnecks are arguably the single hardest dinosaurs on the planet to kill, and a lot of the time they don't even need a weapon to pull it off. They've got size. Being heavier than a battle tank is, it turns out, a fantastic anti-predator strategy. Who's dumb enough to start a fight with that? And when you're that big, your whole body becomes a weapon whether you want it to or not. The feet crush, the neck swings like a wrecking beam, and the tail? On some of them, like Diplodocus, the tail was this enormous whip, and there are studies suggesting they could crack it fast enough to actually break the sound barrier. A living animal generating a sonic boom with its butt. Nature is unhinged. But even by sauropod standards, there was one that took it too far. One that basically fused a sauropod together with an ankylosaur, which, for any predator in the area, is genuinely terrible news, because it grew a club on its tail. Its name is Shunosaurus. So picture the late Jurassic, around 161 to 157 million years ago. You probably know North America back then, the famous Morrison Formation, the Allosaurus and Stegosaurus world. But the other side of the planet was cooking too. China, at that point, sat a lot closer to North America than it does now, and it had kind of become its own Morrison. Tons of plant eaters, tons of predators. In one single environment, the Shaxi-Miao Formation, we found up to 12 different meat-eating theropods. 12. In one place. And these weren't all little guys. Sure, plenty were small to medium, but a couple were monsters. Sinraptor and Yangchuanosaurus, both capable of topping a ton, and Yangchuanosaurus possibly pushing past 3. So the herbivores here were under constant, brutal pressure, and on top of that, they were competing with each other too. Basically, to live in the Shaxi-Miao Formation, you had to be tough. Non-negotiable. Shunosaurus solved that in its own way. Now, it wasn't the biggest sauropod out there. Call it 3 tons, about 11 meters, so 36 feet nose to tail. Respectable, not record-breaking. But the trick was at the end. Right at the tip of that long, muscular tail, Shunosaurus had grown a full-on bony club. A dense chunk of bone the size of your whole head sitting on the end of its tail like a mace. And it gets better because it wasn't a smooth club. Taking a page straight out of the Stegosaur playbook, Shunosaurus had spikes on the thing. Cone-shaped osteoderms sitting right on top of the club, each one at least 2 inches, 5 centimeters, and probably longer in life because fossils wear down, and these spikes may have been sheathed in keratin on top of the bone. So put that together, a long tail, a heavy club, spikes on the club, this animal could whip that weapon around at a truly frightening speed, more than enough force to shatter the bones of a big predator. And then the spikes would focus all that energy down to a point and punch holes in whatever was unlucky enough or stupid enough to get close. And given how tall these things stood, a swing wasn't just gonna clip a leg. We're talking a strike to the ribs, the neck, the skull, cracking a predator open like a coconut. Shunosaurus had a shorter neck than most sauropods, which meant it wasn't reaching up into the treetops. It was grazing low, on the tougher, coarser stuff down near the ground. And to deal with that, its teeth evolved into these robust little shapes, almost like garden shears. Great for snipping through nasty vegetation, obviously. But here's the thing about garden shears. They're built for plants, sure, but they'll happily wreck flesh too. And with a skull that was short, broad, deep, and compact, this thing could clamp down hard. So on top of the wrecking ball, it could hand out some genuinely nasty bites if it wanted to. Realistically though, with a spiked club on a whiptail, I think it usually just defaulted to the club. Wouldn't you? And it worked. Shunosaurus stuck around for millions of years in a place where being tough was the bare minimum entry fee. Not bad for a long neck with a mace. But honestly, a club-tailed sauropod isn't even the most metal plant eater alive at that moment. Because on the other side of the world, at pretty much the exact same time, something even weirder was walking around. In the place that would one day become Morocco, meet Spicomelis, medium-sized dinosaur, and crucially, one of the earliest ankylosaurs we know of. Now, ankylosaurs were already a strange bunch, the armored tanks of the dinosaur world, famous for exotic, sometimes ridiculous armor, and tails that came in club form or a bunch of other pointy configurations. The one you definitely know is Ankylosaurus itself, this 8-ton rolling fortress with a giant club on the back. Spicomelis is related to that icon, but Spicomelis did not have a club. What it had was arguably stranger. At the end of its tail, it had ossified tendons, plus this hardened, stretched out, sharpened bone forming a set of spikes. A proper tail weapon. And okay, a spiky-tailed ankylosaur is already cool, but that's not where Spicomelis stops. Because the spikes weren't only on the tail. They were, as far as we can tell, everywhere. The whole body seems to have been covered in spikes, which turns this thing into an armored ankylosaur that's also, functionally, an oversized porcupine. And it gets weirder, because the spikes came in wildly different sizes. Some small, relatively speaking, and the biggest, most complete ones measuring around 87 centimeters, 34 inches. That's nearly 3 rulers stacked end to end, sticking straight out of a living animal. So genuinely, where are you supposed to bite this thing? There's no safe angle. Come at the back, you get the tail weapon. Come at the side, you get a face full of spikes. It could throw a defense at you from basically any direction at once. Add it all up, and you get an animal you could really only kill by flipping it over. And good luck with that, because it would fight you the whole way. And it was heavier than it looked. About 2 tons once you count all that bone and armor. And it needed every bit of it, because its neighborhood was rough. Megalosaurids around, allosaurs around, and the water was crawling with crocodile relatives, the crocodilomorphs. Didn't matter, the spiky guy lasted over 7 million years. And here's the part I find genuinely important. Right now, Spicomelis is the oldest definitively named ankylosaur we've got, and the oldest verified one with a tail weapon. So this wasn't just some evolutionary side quest. This design, this walking pincushion approach, may be a big reason ankylosaurs got their foot in the door at all, and went on to thrive in a world already stuffed with threats. The blueprint worked so well, they barely needed to be big to scare things off. Which brings me to the one that took the porcupine idea and cranked it all the way to the top. This one's fresh, by the way. like described in 2026 Fresh. Its name is Haolong Dongyi, translates to spiny dragon, which, spoiler, is extremely accurate. Haolong lived in Mesozoic China about 125 million years ago, in the early Cretaceous. It was an ornithischian, part of the iguanodontian group, so it had a passing resemblance to iguanodon, including those famous elongated thumb spikes that probably worked like little stilettos, good for stabbing and slicing. But size-wise, Haolong was nothing like iguanodon. It was small. Now, fair warning, we've only got one nearly complete specimen, and it's a juvenile, so we can't be totally certain how big the adults got. Based on relatives in the region, best guess is roughly half the length of an iguanodon, and a lot lighter. Even at that size, the thumbs, plus being small and nimble, would have kept it safe from most local predators. The charistideers, the little tyrannosaur types like Dilong and Raptorex, the various trooodontids and dromaeosaurs, all manageable. The problem was Eutyrannus. That one grew to a genuinely lethal size for a Haolong, up to 9 meters, close to 30 feet, over a ton. To something Haolong size, an adult Eutyrannus is a nightmare. Even a fully grown Haolong is prime target practice. So how do you deal with that when you're small? You do something no dinosaur had ever been caught doing before. You grow quills. When they dug up the original specimen, the preservation was unreal. We're talking skin down to the cellular level. And what they found was that the animal was covered in hollow keratinous spines. Not the fuzzy protofeathers you see on theropods, not the scales of a modern lizard. These matched closely the quills on a living porcupine. Hollow, skin-based structures, never confirmed in any dinosaur before this one. A genuine quill dinosaur. And do I really need to explain why quills work? Porcupines are tiny. Porcupines are also left almost completely alone, because eating one is a self-inflicted injury. Researchers figure Haolong ran the same playbook. The quills were a shield. Any mouth that came in looking for a bite left with a bad day. Just like modern porcupines, the quills varied. Smallest ones short and thin, largest ones thicker and up to 2 inches, and again, probably longer in life once you account for fossilization. Now one mystery, and it's a good one. Because we only have that juvenile, we don't actually know for sure that the adults kept their quills. But if they did, and if those quills scaled up as the animal grew, then we might be looking at an adult ornithopod carrying hundreds, maybe thousands of knife-length quills. At which point trying to eat one isn't a hunting decision, it's a suicide attempt. All of that, remember, on an animal that wasn't even big. Which is kind of the running theme here, right? Most of these guys skipped the size route entirely and just got weird and pointy. But I'd be lying if I said size didn't work, because for the sauropods, being enormous was always the classic fallback that just got the job done. Thing is, outside the long necks, big usually still wasn't big enough. A regular large plant eater, you strip its armor or its horns, and predators would line right up. But there was one group that quietly used pure size the way sauropods did, and a couple of them pushed it to a genuinely absurd place, becoming the largest dinosaurs of all time that weren't sauropods. The hadrosaurs, the duckbills. On paper, your average hadrosaur is not what you'd call metal. No horns, no armor, no spikes, just a plant eater in the 2 to 4 ton range, bigger than your median dinosaur, but nothing that keeps a predator up at night. Perfectly normal. Except a few of them decided normal was boring and evolved into absolute giants. For years, the poster child was Shantungosaurus, and this is our first late Cretaceous animal today, living in China again about 77 million years ago. On paper, and I mean genuinely on paper if you sketched it out, Shantungosaurus looks like a totally standard duckbill. Nothing about the body shape screams, "Look at me." It sat in the same tribe as Edmontosaurus, very normal company. But if you actually stood next to a grown adult, you'd realize immediately that standard is the wrong word. Because this thing was, functionally, a kaiju. Snout to tail, we're talking around 56 feet, 17 meters, weighing up to 18 tons, maybe more. That's bigger than T-Rex. That's one of the single largest animals on the entire continent at the time. A duckbill that outweighs the Tyrant King. At that scale, you do not need weapons. The size is the weapon. You ever heard the thing about how you should respect a horse's kick? Yeah, a kick from this animal isn't a broken bone, it's a closed casket. And honestly, forget kicking. This thing just walking, never mind running, is a freight train with legs. For basically every predator in the neighborhood, an adult Shantungosaurus was pure fantasy, off the menu. The only one that even got in the conversation was Juchungtyrannus, a tyrannosaur around 10 meters, 33 feet, 5 metric tons, which is big and still nowhere near Shantungosaurus. One Juchungtyrannus taking on a full-grown one alone is a stretch that ends badly for the tyrannosaur. And that's before you factor in the strong evidence that these duckbills moved in herds, which stacks their defense even higher. A pack hunter's worst matchup is a bigger animal that also brought friends. And the giant hadrosaur play clearly worked because oversized duckbills were thriving right up until the asteroid ended everything. Makes you wonder where that lineage goes if the rock misses. But okay, as much as I love all of these, I can't wrap up without paying respect to the actual Mount Rushmore of metal herbivores. The three that, if you know this stuff at all, you already saw coming. Ankylosaurus, Triceratops, Stegosaurus. And here's a detail I love. All three were ornithischians, and all three shared one thing. They each grew up in a world of absolutely relentless danger. Ankylosaurus and Triceratops both lived alongside the largest land predator we've ever confirmed, T-Rex itself. Stegosaurus lived in the Morrison Formation, maybe the single most infamous predator neighborhood of the entire Jurassic, spoiled for choice on things that wanted to eat it. So all three did the same thing. They became freaks of nature inside their own families. And step one of that formula was size, because every one of them is either the largest or basically the largest member of its whole family. Ankylosaurus, 8 tons, Stegosaurus, 5, Triceratops, somewhere between 6 and 10 depending on who you ask. Absolute units across the board. But size was just the entry fee. Each one also brought a signature weapon. Ankylosaurus had the osteoderm armor sheeting huge parts of its body, plus the biggest known club of any ankylosaur, and that club could swing hard enough to pulverize bone. Attacking one was, to put it kindly, a smooth-brained decision. And here's a tell. Ankylosaurus is the only known large plant eater from the Hell Creek Formation that hasn't turned up with T-Rex bite damage on it. Doesn't prove anything on its own, but it sure hints that even the king looked at this thing and thought, not worth it. Then Triceratops. And Triceratops holds a record nothing else can touch. It's the only dinosaur we've conclusively confirmed actually injured a T-Rex, thanks to the famous dueling dinosaurs specimen. It managed that with a genuinely overpowered build. Huge bony frill shielding not just the face, but the vulnerable neck. And sitting up front, the crown jewel of the whole ceratopsian family, that set of sharp horns. 3 of them, the top 2 way longer than the bottom. Bony cores wrapped in a thick keratin sheath, which means in life they were longer than what you see mounted in a museum. And that's saying something, because the longest horn cores on record, from one particular specimen, already run about 115 centimeters, nearly 3.8 feet. Long enough that if a Triceratops shoved its horn through your car's driver's side window, someone in the passenger seat is still getting skewered. Oh, and one correction on the classic image. In life, those horns curved, they weren't straight. Which is worse, not better, because a curved horn makes a messier wound, a bigger wound channel, more bleeding, more infection risk, assuming you even survive the hit. Big assumption. And the curve gave the animal leverage to buck its head and toss whatever it gored straight up into the air, like a bull does today. And then, saving the best for last, Stegosaurus. And its infamous thagomizer, that cluster of spikes on the end of a thick, muscular tail. Same construction as the Triceratops horns, solid bony core, keratin sheath, so longer and sharper in life than the fossil suggests. One study estimated that Stegosaurus could swing that tail with enough muscle behind it to generate around 35 kilos of force. Which, on its own, doesn't sound scary, but that's the trick. All that force lands on the tips of the spikes, tiny surface area. So the actual pressure at the point is more than 1,000 times the atmospheric pressure at sea level. That is more than enough to punch clean through skin, muscle, organs, and yes, bone. Which brings us all the way back to the animal we opened with. Because that Allosaurus, the one dying at the very start of this video with a hole through its groin, some years back we found it. Real specimen. And that puncture wound is a precise, perfect match for the shape of a Stegosaurus thagomizer. And the worst part, the genuinely grim part, is that the Allosaurus didn't die on the spot. The bone shows it survived the hit and then suffered for who knows how long before the wound finally finished the job. A predator, an apex predator, killed slowly by the thing it tried to eat. And if the tail somehow wasn't enough, here's a lesser-known Stegosaurus secret. It was armored too. Well, partly. Around the throat, it had this specialized gular armor, hundreds of little bony plates and nodules, protecting the one soft spot a predator would actually aim for. So even the killing bite was covered. So yeah, predators. Sure, they're scary, they earned the reputation, but every single one of these animals is a plant eater that looked the food chain dead in the eye and said, "Not me, not today." Clubs, spikes, quills, horns, walls of armor, and enough raw size to make a tyrannosaur reconsider its life choices. And here's the thing, this isn't even close to the full list. There are so many more of these hardcore herbivores out there, so many more animals that flipped from prey to nightmare. But those stories are for another day. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.